Rise and shine! Allow me to start my report by reading the background of the reporter or the researcher. So, by the way, this is Joselmea Solatorio Garcia, studying at Mindanao State University Buug Campus, taking up the course of Bachelor of Science in Nursing, BSN 1, NSG 106, or also known as the Healthcare Ethics. Okay, next slide. We have here the objectives. So for this presentation, at the end of this presentation, the student should be able to define embryo, know about the storage of human embryos, identify the importance and uses of human embryos, realize its purpose and application in the field of medicine. And the last one, we have get to know about the in vitro fertilization or the IVF process, reasons, procedures, and also the 3 related cases to human embryo storage and use. Okay, the main topic for today is ethical issues on storage and use of human embryos. Okay, what comes into your mind when you hear the word human embryo? So what is human embryo? Embryo is the early stage of development of multicellular organism. In general, in organisms that produce sexually, embryonic development is a part of a life cycle that begins just after fertilization and continues through the formation of body structure such as tissues and organs. To make it easier to comprehend, it is an unborn human or animal in the earliest stage of growth when its basic structure are being formed. So, here I have the storage of human embryos. According to the American Medical Association, or AMA, Code of Ethics Opinion 4.2.5, embryos created during the cycles in vitro fertilization, or what we call the IVF, that are not intended for immediate transfer and often frozen for future use. The main objective is to lessen the risk and burden by minimizing the number of cycles of ovarian stimulation and egg retrieval that an IVF patient undergoes. So, here, let's proceed to the use of human embryos, or its purpose or its proceeds. Frozen embryos may also offer, number 1, hope to the other prospective parents who would otherwise not be able to have a child. Second, the prospect of advancing scientific knowledge for research purposes. Okay, the number 3, we have enhancement for study of normal and abnormal differentiation and development. And the number 4 is benefit children with birth defects, genetical derived malignancy, and disorders. So, now let's know more about in vitro fertilization, or the IVF. So, in vitro fertilization is a process where a woman's egg is fertilized outside her body together with a sperm cell of a man and will undergo processes inside the laboratory. So the IVF process goes like this. A woman's reproductive organ is composed of vagina, cervix, uterus, fallopian tube, and ovaries. During the monthly menstrual cycle, one of the ovary releases an egg in a process called ovulation. It will now enter the fallopian tube, and during this time, a man's reproductive fluid called the semen is now able to fertilize the egg in the fallopian tube. And then, as it travels along the fallopian tube, the fertilized egg is now called as embryo and loses the outer cell that nourished in the ovary and now enters the uterus. Here in the uterus, an embryo shed its outer layer called the zona pellucida in a process called zona hatching, necessary to implant the tissue lining the uterus. So, we have here the reasons for IVF, so why we are doing in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization may be performed in the following circumstances. So the first reason will be if a woman has been having trouble of getting pregnant or for infertility. While the second one is if a woman desires to have a child without a male partner. So let's continue our IVF process. In fertilization consists of three main procedures. The number one is the follicle aspiration, second is the fertilization, and the embryo transfer. So now let's talk about follicle aspiration. So what it is? It is a process where eggs will be harvested from the ovaries through inserting an ultrasound probe in a woman's vagina. It will now target the follicle, which is a fluid-filled sac that contained an egg. A needle will be inserted, guided to the ovary, and with the help of the suction device, it will now attract eggs. So, after the follicle aspiration, let's proceed to the second procedure, which is the fertilization. Okay, it is a process where eggs will be taken immediately to the laboratory where eggs will be fertilized. It will undergo insemination where several sperms will be mixed with the healthiest eggs. So what we can see in the first picture or the picture above. While or through intracytoplasmic sperm injection, wherein sperms are directly injected to the egg cells, or what you can see to the second picture or the blue one. So, the embryo will be monitored from 3 to 5 days as they begin to grow. At this time, a lab may create a hole in a zona pellucida called as assisted hatching. Okay, take note. Some of the embryo will be used right away for an embryo transfer, while the rest will be stored and be frozen for future use if necessary. So now let's proceed to the third procedure, which is the embryo transfer. Okay. It is a process which is done 3 to 5 days after fertilization. During this procedure, a tool called speculum is inserted in the woman's vagina to see the cervix. A syringe containing one or more of the hatched embryo will be attached to a long thin tube called the catheter. The doctor will insert the catheter to the vagina through the cervix into the uterus. In the uterus, the doctor will inject the embryos and withdraw the catheter together with the speculum. After the whole process, a woman may lie down in bed for 15 to 20 minutes to take some rest. Okay, now let's talk about the legal and ethical debate surrounding the storage and destruction of frozen human embryo, a reaction on mass disposal. So, the first country it shows is the America. So, as we can see here, the America. So, the first one is America. Lot of unclaimed and abandoned embryos coming from couples around America who donated their eggs and sperms to undergo the process called in vitro fertilization. or the IVF. These embryos are being kept for later use either for research purposes or for producing more children. But later on, the storage of embryos becomes the hottest controversy. So why? Hospital facilities don't have any consensus as to whether the frozen cells should be destroyed after a certain length of time or should undergo cryopreserved. Okay, so as you all know, a cryopreservation or cryoconservation is a process where organelles, cells, tissues, extracellular matrix, organs, or any other biological constructs susceptible to damage caused by unregulated chemicals, kinetics are preserved by cooling to very low temperature indefinitely. So, the clinical personnel and the clinic will be the one to face the dilemma. They are very clueless what to do with the left embryo since couples who donated don't sign any pre-procedural agreements regarding the disposition of it. They have lots of choices in the first place. Like for example, they can donate the embryos for research, they can have the embryo destroyed, they can keep the embryo frozen, or they can give the embryo anonymously to another couples. So the main issue here in America is that they lack of laws. So the government doesn't able to make a final decision on what to do with the stock and the stored embryo, which becomes massive, that attracts the attention of the public. Okay, so now let's proceed to the second country I pick, which is the okay, let's wait for a while. Britain. Okay, so the second country, let's go to Britain. In Britain, unclaimed embryos must be destroyed within 5 years after creation, absent instruction from parents, donors. Oh my God. They have enacted the law to prevent the endless expensive storage of abandoned embryos. British law was implemented on August 1, 1991, states that 5 years after the IVF process, the embryo will be destroyed if the parents will be unreachable and would not respond to any governmental calls. It is to avoid the massive storage of embryos. With regards to this law, the frozen embryos have been routinely destroyed in fertility clinics in small batches every week since the 1980s. This issue has been carried out by government order and reached the unprecedented scale. The public's attention became focused on the ethical implication of the frozen embryo disposal. So now let's proceed to the third case or the third issue, which is the ethical and moral implication of embryo disposal. Okay, we have a very catchy sentence here. Disposal of embryo is tantamount to murder. Okay. The current debate over embryo storage and disposal stems from the belief that the destruction of potential human life is unethical and immoral. That belief fueled much of the opposition to the destruction of the frozen embryo. Okay, here comes. Because of the Roman Catholic Church believes life begins at the moment of conception, it considers the disposal of embryo to be to be murder. The Vatican newspaper or El Osservatore Romano denounced the embryo destruction in Britain as a prenatal massacre. So they consider the disposal of embryo as a prenatal massacre. Protesters held vigils outside Westminster Cathedral prior to the destruction of memorial services afterwards. An anti-abortion group like the Life Campaigns appealed for a 6-month delay to the disposal, but the Prime Minister denied the appeal. In addition, people throughout Europe offered to adopt the frozen cell. An Italian fertility clinic even offered to buy 904 embryos destroyed at Bourne Hall, Britain's pioneer fertility clinic. Lastly, some fertility clinic workers even contemplated jail time rather to enforce the law, though they eventually yielded and destroyed the embryo. So now, before I end this video, allow me to read the important points of these ethical issues regarding the storage and use of human embryo. Okay, advocates to disposal claim that a 24-old embryo is not yet at the stage of development where it is capable of potential personhood or moral attributes. Although a fertilized egg contains all the information necessary to develop into a person, until 11 to 14 days after conception, the cell is undifferentiated. Disposal advocates argue that the undifferentiation of the frozen cell lends support to the idea that the embryo is not yet a person. Believers of life at conception claims the cell of the embryo derive their human status from the existence of the requisite number of human chromosomes. These chromosomes, however, are present in all human cells, including shed, skin cells, hair cells, and fingernail cells. Therefore, sometimes beyond the right number of chromosomes is needed to transform the embryo into a human being. An embryo will only become life if implanted and allowed to develop in a human uterus. So that's it. That's the main point. Without a human's assistance, the embryo is essentially no different from any other human cell. Therefore, frozen embryo is essentially no different from other human cell. Therefore, frozen embryo is not human life, okay? Frozen embryo is not human life, and their destruction is not akin to murder. Okay, understood? That's it. Thank you for listening and reading my presentation. God bless you and have a nice day ahead. Bye-bye.